Hello everyone. So in the previous video we are covering the main provision of the Indian Council Act 1909, which was also known as Morley-Minto reform. So in the general introductions we have seen that after the general election of 1908, Liberal Party came into the Britain, and they laid the foundation of the Morley-Minto reforms, in which the expansion of central legislative council and expansion of all provincial legislative councils and enlargement of the power and functions of the legislative councils we have seen. And now we are going to see the fourth provision of the Morley-Minto reform, which is the provision of communal electorate system. So the franchise provided under this act was narrow and discriminatory. Means franchise is matadikar. Right now we see in common days that it's like a universal adult franchise. So that time the franchise was limited. All the people were not allowed to vote, and also the voting rights were given on the basis of taxes paid by the Indian members, and the member who is paying more taxes were uh, given the right to vote only, and the certain based on the Muslims was given more representation than the other communities. So see the same point is written here. The Muslim were given a special representation, and in central and provincial legislative councils, the seats were reserved for them. For Muslim, seats were reserved, and these representatives were to be elected by the Muslim voter only. As we have seen that the rights were special rights were given to the Muslim because of the Lord Curzon, who have allowed the a special representation of the Muslim in the legislative, because for their policy of a divide and rule. So they thought, Britishers thought that by doing so they will permanently create the wedge between the Muslims and Hindus and other communities, and in this way they can keep their rule continued. So that's why the special representations were given to the central and provincial legislatives in the of the Muslim, and the number of seats reserved for Muslim in the central legislative council was 6, and this number different in a state to a state. So now number fifth provision is the exclusive representation for the Muslims. As we have seen, the Muslims were given privileged treatment in the matter of representation in the legislature. For example, the Muslim in the UP formed 1/6. The population of the Muslim in the UP was only one of the sixth, but the total number of seats that were given to them was 8 seats out of total 26 seats. So basically, it became 8 upon 26, which is uh, 2 upon 13. So out of 13 members, 2 members were of the Muslims. So it was a huge representation of the Muslim in the council as compared to compared to their population. So such privileges were not given to other members of the community, as I have said you, and this was so because the British wanted to create the divide and rule game again. And number six provision was restricted and discriminatory representation. Similar here also in the topic about we have talked is the Muslim highest representation as compared to other communities, and this time it's in very detail. So let's see. The franchise given under the Act of 1909 was quite restricted and discriminatory. The right to vote was given to big landlords, as I have said you. Only landlords and the highest paying taxer was allowed. The landlords and title holders were given, and besides, the Muslim were given more representation in comparison to the Sikh, Hindus, Parsis, and Christians. For for example, the Muslim who pay paid an income tax on annual income of 3,000 rupees, just 3,000 rupees, or land revenue comparatively, and Muhammad graduates of the 5 year standing had been given the right to vote for the Central Legislative Council, whereas other members who were paying more than lakh 3 lakhs was not allowed to vote. So let's see what is meant by Muhammadan graduate. So basically, Muhammad graduate refers to the Muslim individuals who had completed higher education, particularly from the recognized university and institutions during British colonial period in India. So as I have said you, even though they were paying the tax of 3,000 rupees, they are comparative land revenue. They were allowed to vote, but whereas Indian other communities with Parsis, Hindus, Christian who might be paying an income tax of more than 3 lakhs a year, but were not entitled to vote. So also non-Muslim graduates of even 30 years had no right to vote. Means whether you are paying high taxes or not, or whether you are of age or not, that was the not criteria. Criteria was that Muslims given more representation, and so even though their age is under the defined under defined conditions, they were given the right to vote. So the French franchise was based on very high property qualifications, and in some cases, the number of voters in some constitution did not exceed 9 or 10. So see, in a single province, only 9 or 10 voters. So and you can imagine from this that these voters would have been the voters that support the British rules, because it's just the common because for demanding the rights of the votes, you need to go to the government, and if government is allowing you, then you must be in the favor of the government, British government. So these were this was the factors responsible. Number seventh factor was sorry, it's not factor, it provision. So number seventh provision is the strict qualification for the member of legislative council. So to be the member of the legislative councils, you need to follow the stricter regulations, or stricter you can say the test to get in the party. So basically, the qualification for the member of legislative councils were arbitrary and unreasonable. Arbitrary means manmana, means Britishers can deny anyone from getting elected without giving any reason. So the purpose was to deny the representation of nationalists and men of light. Means the Britishers were afraid if members of nationalist thinking or sorry, or man who is able to influence the Indian people would come in the legislative power, then this might cause damage to their British rule. So in Bombay, Madras, and Bengal, eligibility to the membership of provincial councils was confined to the members of municipal and district boards only, and just for the same, to avoid nationalist and men of light in the legislative council. Also, the disqualification were quite obnoxious. Means there was no certain rules or perfect rules for the disqualification. As I've said you, if Britishers think that you are of the nationalist thinking, or have the representations uh, have the, you can say that if you have the right, if you have thinking like you want to get Indian government or something like that, you do not support British government, then you may not be allowed in the legislative council, whatever though you have a greater qualification or something else. So the disqualification were quite obnoxious. Government officials, women, person dismissed from the government services, bankrupt persons, and unsounded mind, bankrupt person of unsounded mind had been sentenced to imprisonment or transportation, etc., were not allowed to contest election. So what were the peoples? Government officials, women, person dismissed from the government services, means the man who has been dismissed by the Britishers from their services. Also, the bankrupt person who proved to be unsounded mind, and or a person who have even been gone to the in jail were not allowed to contest election. So basically, here you can think of the actual main aim of or main goal of the Britishers was to deny the nationalist and men of light in the legislative council. So besides, the government had ample power to disqualify any candidate from the standing for the election. As I said, you they had a full control in their hand. So now let's see the eighth provision. So the eighth provision was the provision of the nomination of members. So basically, the procedure of nomination was adopted to give representation to those interests which were not likely to be adequately represented through elections. Means the members who are not as nationalist or men of lights do not have proper representation of the peoples, do not care for the properly care for the Indian peoples were given the representation. Also, the government of India had absolutely free hand in such nationalist such nomination, and no qualification were fixed for nominations. Means no actual qualification or actual criteria or actual steps was given for the qualification of nomination. It was all just in the hands of the Britishers. Number ninth provision was no representation to certain parts of the India. Means the Britishers, the parts which Britishers thought that giving representation to these areas might hamper their rule. So they not allowed representation in those provinces or those parts of the India, and it was just under the control of the Governor General. So let's see some parts of the British India, like the northwestern frontier province, Kurgazmer and Marwar, were under the direct administration of the Governor General, and these were areas were not given by representation in central and provincial legislative councils. So, what were the area? Northwest frontier provinces, Kurgazmer and Marwar, and these were under the direct Governor General administration. Now, number 10th provision is the expansion of the Executive Council of the Governor General. So, of which first one is the appointment of Indians to the Executive Council was another important feature of the Morley-Minto reforms. Though instead of all, as we have seen that Lord Curzon has announced that uh, that Lord Curzon has denied the representation of and of the any members of Indians in the high officials. Also, the members before the Lord Curzon supported the same idea that no high officers ranking should be given to the Britishers. And as we have seen in the Act of 1858 also, that in the Queen's Proclamation it was also clear spoken that high ranking positions would be restored to the Britishers and Europeans only. So but after the act of the 1909, executive councils was that some of the representatives, high-ranking officers, high-ranking representations were given to Indians. So one of the example is Mr. S.P. Sinha, the Advocate General of Bengal, was appointed as the law member of the Governor General Council, which gave very great satisfaction to the educated Indians, because we have seen that before 1909, educated Indians were asking for the jobs and others, but they were not getting jobs. So with these steps, it was clear that now governments would provide jobs to the Indians, and also uh, educated Indians got inspired in themselves that with education and with dedicated working, they can gain or acquire highest positions in the British officers. So the appointed was a matter of great satisfaction of the educated India, and after Lord Curzon's pronouncement in 1904 that the highest ranking of the civil employment should generally be reserved for the Englishman, as I have said you, that it was only reserved for the Englishman after and after the 1858 only. But in 1904, Lord Curzon announced it again. Same things that high-ranking high rank will be only empowered to Englishman only, or high-ranking will be highest rank of the civil employment will be reserved to Englishman only. So the admission of Indians direct into the executive government was very much likely the introduction of a new principle. So Mr. Sinha work as law members was quite impressive. On this, the Muslim who asked for the appointment of a Muslim members, but the demand was rejected. So the Muslim thought that they have got highest representation in the election. So similarly, they will be able to get even the that highest ranks in the civil employment, but their demand was denied. Also, the number of members of the executive councils of Bombay and Madras was raised from 2 to 4, and at least one of them was to be the Indians. So these all were the provisions of the Indian Council Act of 1909, or Morley-Minto reforms. So so let's again revise what were the provisions. So number one was the expansion of central legislative councils, in which we have seen that members in the legislative councils were increased. Also, nominated members were increased. Total number of nomination was of 69. Similarly, expansion of a provincial legislative council also took place, in which we have seen that legislative councils numbers in every provinces was increased, and enlargement of the power of function of legislative councils, in which we have seen the right to ask supplementary questions were given to the Indians or non-officer members, and provision of communal electorate system, in which we have seen that Muslims were given the special representations, and in number fifth provision we have seen the excessive representation of the Muslim, in which we have seen that though the member in the Muslims population of Muslims were lesser as, but they were given the proper representation, or representation more than their population. Also, we have seen the restricted and discriminatory representation, and which we have seen that the right to vote was given to the big landlords only, and the person who have the great contribution in the taxes were only allowed to give votes. Also, seventh provision we have seen the strict qualification for the member of legislative council, in which we have seen that uh, British officers had a proper power to deny anyone's participation in the officers sorry, in legislative councils without giving any reason. And number 8 provision was the provision of nomination of members, in which we similar thing was that all the control was in the hand of the British. Also, no representation to the certain parts of India, as Marwar had were under the direct control of the Governor General. And we in the last provision we have seen that the expansion of executive council of Governor General, where we have seen that MP Sinha was appointed as the law member of the Governor General Council. So now let's see the critical evolution of the Act of 1909. So number one, expansion of Union and Provincial Legislative Council, as we have seen, increase in the power of function and legislative councils, and Indians was made member of Governor General and Executive Council, which is MP Sinha, and acceptance of electoral principle, and this was for the first time in the British rule. So for now, let's stop here. In the next video, we will see the defects of the Act of 1909. So thank you.